transport shuttle shook as it docked with Galactic Defense Station Omega-7. Through the small window, Kwandaeho could see the massive space station floating in the darkness. Stars twinkled beyond it, like tiny diamonds scattered across black silk. He had never seen anything so beautiful or so frightening. "Are you sure about this, Brother Daeho?" asked Choi Minho, the young soldier sitting beside him. Minho wore the standard gray uniform of Earth's Defense Force. His boots were polished black and his hair was cut short and neat. He looked like every other human soldier on the shuttle. Daeho looked very different. He wore simple orange robes that reached his ankles. His head was shaved smooth and he carried only a plain wooden staff. Around his neck hung a small string of prayer beads. He looked like he belonged in an ancient temple, not on a space station. "The path chooses us, Brother Minho," Daeho said softly. "We do not choose the path." Minho shook his head but said nothing more. He had known Daeho since they were children in the same village. Even then, Daeho had been different. While other boys played with toy guns and dreamed of being soldiers, Daeho sat quietly and watched the world around him. He found peace in small things like the way leaves moved in the wind or how water flowed over stones. The shuttle door opened with a loud hiss. Air rushed in, carrying strange smells that neither human had ever experienced before. The other passengers began to file out. Most were aliens from different worlds across the galaxy. There was a tall, thin creature with blue skin and 4 arms. Its eyes were large and completely black. It wore armor that looked like it was made from some kind of metal that shifted colors as it moved. In 2 of its hands, it carried weapons that hummed with energy. Behind it walked something that looked like a giant insect. It had 6 legs and a hard shell that covered its back. Its head was triangular, and its mouth was filled with sharp teeth. When it breathed, small puffs of steam came from holes in its neck. Other aliens followed. Some had scales like reptiles, others had fur like animals from Earth. A few looked almost human but had skin that glowed with soft light. Each one carried weapons or wore armor that looked far more advanced than anything Earth had ever created. They all stared at Daeho as he walked past them. Some pointed and whispered to each other in languages he could not understand. A few laughed, though he could not tell what they found funny. He kept his eyes forward and his face calm. Minho stayed close beside him. The young soldier's hand rested on the energy pistol at his side. His eyes moved constantly, watching the aliens around them. He was nervous, but he tried not to show it. The station corridor was huge. The ceiling stretched up so high that Daeho could barely see it. Lights embedded in the walls cast everything in a soft, white glow. The floor felt strange under his simple sandals. It seemed to be made of some material that was harder than stone but smoother than metal. "All new recruits report to Bay 7, announced a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The words were spoken in perfect English, but there was something strange about the voice. It sounded like it came from a machine rather than a living thing. They followed the stream of aliens through the corridor. Along the way, Daeho saw windows that looked out into space. He paused at one of them, amazed by the view. Planets hung in the distance like colored balls. Ships moved between them, some as small as the shuttle they had arrived in, others so large they looked like floating cities. "Come on," Minho said, pulling gently at his arm. "We do not want to be late on our first day." Bay 7 was enormous. The ceiling was even higher than the corridor, and the walls curved up and around them like they were standing inside a giant bowl. Hundreds of aliens stood in neat rows, facing a raised platform at the front of the room. On the platform stood 3 figures. The one in the center was tall and covered in scales that shifted from green to brown as it moved. Its eyes were yellow with vertical pupils like a snake. It wore a uniform that was dark blue with silver markings on the chest and shoulders. To its left stood something that looked like a walking stick insect, but much larger. It was at least 7 feet tall, with arms and legs that were thin like twigs, but looked incredibly strong. Its skin was the color of dried leaves, and its eyes were compound like a fly's, made up of thousands of tiny parts that caught the light. The third figure was the strangest of all. It seemed to be made of pure energy, constantly shifting, and, changing shape. Sometimes it looked almost human, other times it appeared to be nothing more than a cloud of glowing gas. When it spoke, its voice sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Welcome, warriors of the galaxy," said the scaled creature. Its voice was deep and rough like rocks grinding together. "I am Commander Veltar of the Serpentine Republic. You have come here because your worlds have answered the call, the Keth Mori. Empire threatens all free life in this sector. We need the strongest, the fastest, the most skilled fighters if we are to stop them." The insect-like being stepped forward. Its voice was sharp and clicking, like twigs breaking. "I am Captain Nix Ara of the Hive Collective. Over the next 7 days you will be tested. Most of you will fail. Only the best will join our forces. The weak will return to their homes in shame." Murmurs rose from the crowd. Some aliens shifted nervously. Others stood straighter, as if accepting a challenge. Deho remained perfectly still. His hands were folded in front of him, and his breathing was slow and steady. He looked like he was meditating even while standing. Commander Veltar's yellow eyes swept over the crowd. They paused when they reached the small group of humans near the back. His gaze lingered on Deho for a long moment. "Humans," he said, and his voice carried across the entire bay. "Your species is new to the Alliance. You have proven yourselves capable in small conflicts, but this will be different. The Keth Mori are not like the pirates you have faced before. They are organized, ruthless, and powerful. Are you certain you belong here?" Several human soldiers straightened and called out that they were ready. Minho joined them, his voice strong and clear. But Deho said nothing. He simply stood in silence, his eyes focused on something none of the others could see. Captain Nixara noticed his stillness. She moved to the edge of the platform and looked down at him. "You, in the orange robes, what is your name?" "Quan Deho," he replied. His voice was soft but clear. "What weapons do you carry, Quan Deho?" Deho lifted his wooden staff slightly. "Only this." A ripple of laughter ran through the crowd. Some aliens pointed at him and spoke to each other in amused tones. The blue-skinned creature with 4 arms laughed so hard it had to lean against a wall for support. Captain Nixara tilted her triangular head. Her compound eyes studied him like he was some kind of strange insect she had never seen before. "That is a stick." "Yes," Deho agreed. "A piece of wood." "Yes." "And you believe this will help you fight the Keth Mori Empire?" "I believe it will help me find balance," Deho said. "Balance in all things leads to understanding. Understanding leads to peace." More laughter erupted from the crowd. Even some of the human soldiers smiled and shook their heads. Minho's face turned red with embarrassment. Captain Nixara's mandibles clicked together in what might have been amusement. "Peace will not save the galaxy from the Keth Mori, monk. Only strength and skill matter in war." "Perhaps," Deho said simply. Commander Veltar stepped forward. His scaled face showed no emotion, but his yellow eyes were cold. "The trials begin tomorrow at dawn. Those who survive will move to the next level. Those who do not will be sent home." He paused and looked directly at Deho. "Or to the medical bay." The crowd began to disperse. Aliens moved toward the exits, many still chuckling about the human in orange robes who thought he could fight a war with a stick. Minho waited until most of them were gone before speaking. "Brother Deho, are you certain about this? These aliens have weapons that can destroy entire buildings. They have armor that can stop bullets. They have technology we can barely understand. And you have a stick," Deho finished for him. "Yes, I know." "Then why are you here?" Deho looked up at the ceiling of Bay 7. Somewhere far above them, beyond the metal and glass and technology, the stars were still shining. "Because someone must be," he said. As they walked toward their assigned quarters, neither human noticed, the energy being on the platform watching them go. Its form flickered and shifted, and if they had been able to understand its language, they might have heard it whisper something that sounded almost like recognition. The trials would begin soon, and everyone expected the monk in orange robes to be the first to fail. They had no idea how wrong they were. The alarm sounded before dawn. Red lights flashed in the corridors of Galactic Defense Station Omega-7 as hundreds of recruits hurried toward the training facilities. Most had barely slept, too nervous about the trials ahead. Deho had spent the night in meditation. While other recruits checked their weapons and armor, he sat cross-legged on his simple bed, breathing slowly and steadily. His wooden staff lay across his knees and his prayer beads rested in his open palms. Minho had watched him for hours, amazed by his friend's calmness. "How can you be so peaceful?" he had asked. "Tomorrow they might kill us. Today they might teach us," Deho had replied without opening his eyes. Now they stood in Training Bay Alpha, surrounded by technology that seemed impossible. The walls were covered with screens showing star maps and battle plans. Floating platforms moved through the air without any visible support. Holographic displays showed the faces and names of each recruit. Instructor Zeflon appeared before them like a ghost made of light. Its form shifted constantly, sometimes looking almost human, other times becoming pure energy that danced and flickered. When it spoke, its voice sounded like music. "The first trial tests your ability to move through dangerous spaces," Zeflon announced. "You will navigate a zero-gravity obstacle course while automated defenses try to stop you. Most military forces rely on technology to solve such problems. We want to see how you think when technology fails." The course appeared around them as if summoned by magic. Walls rose from the floor, creating a maze of corridors and chambers. Laser turrets emerged from hidden panels, their red targeting beams sweeping back and forth. Energy barriers flickered to life, blocking certain paths while leaving others open. "Gravity will be reduced to zero," Zeflon continued. "You have 30 minutes to reach the exit. You may use any equipment you brought with you, but remember that enemy forces often use electromagnetic weapons that can disable your technology." The first group of recruits entered the course. They wore powered armor that helped them move in zero gravity. Jetpacks on their backs let them fly through the air. Energy shields protected them from the laser turrets. They moved quickly and efficiently, using their technology to overcome every obstacle. But halfway through the course, their equipment began to fail. The jetpacks sputtered and died. The energy shields flickered and went out. The recruits found themselves floating helplessly as the laser turrets locked onto them. Red beams shot out, striking the aliens and marking them as eliminated. "Electromagnetic interference," Zeflon explained to the watching recruits. "The Kethamori use such weapons regularly. Those who depend entirely on technology will find themselves helpless." Group after group entered the course. Some lasted longer than others, but all eventually fell victim to the same problem. Their equipment failed, and they could not adapt quickly enough to survive. Finally, it was the humans' turn. Minho and several other Earth soldiers entered together, along with 2 other recruits who had joined their group. One was Lee So-jin, a young woman who worked as an engineer on Korean space stations. The other was Park Hyun-woo, a pilot who flew transport ships between Earth and Mars. They moved carefully through the course, using their jetpacks sparingly and trying to stay behind cover. When their equipment failed, they were better prepared than most aliens had been. Earth's military trained soldiers to fight without technology when necessary. But even they struggled. The laser turrets were too fast and too accurate. The energy barriers changed position constantly, making it impossible to predict safe paths. They managed to get further than most groups, but eventually they too were eliminated. "Acceptable," Zeflon said as they returned to the starting area. "Better than most." Then Deho stepped forward. He had been waiting patiently, watching each group attempt the course. Now he stood at the entrance, wearing only his simple orange robes and carrying his wooden staff. "Are you certain you wish to attempt this alone?" Zeflon asked. "Most recruits work in teams." "I am never alone," Deho replied softly. The course activated around him. Gravity disappeared and he should have begun floating helplessly like all the others. Instead, something impossible happened. Deho moved through the zero-gravity environment, as if he were walking on solid ground. His feet seemed to find purchase on the air itself. He flowed through the corridors like water, never hurrying but never stopping. When the laser turrets targeted him, he was already somewhere else. He seemed to sense where they would fire before they did, moving out of the way with perfect timing. His wooden staff became a blur as he used it to redirect energy beams, sending them bouncing harmlessly off the walls. The energy barriers could not stop him. He passed through spaces that seemed too small for a human body, bending and twisting, in ways that should have been impossible. Sometimes he appeared to float directly through the barriers as if they were not there at all. So-Jin watched from the observation deck, her eyes wide with amazement. She had brought a small scanner with her, hoping to study the alien technology. Now she pointed it at Daeho and gasped at what she saw. "Impossible," she whispered. "What is it?" Minho asked. "Energy readings," she said, her voice shaking. "There is energy around him, not from any machine. It is coming from him." On the course, Daeho continued to move with impossible grace. He reached the halfway point where all the other groups had failed. Their equipment had shut down here due to electromagnetic interference. But Daeho had no equipment to fail. He paused for a moment, standing in the center of a chamber filled with laser turrets. They all targeted him at once, dozens of red beams, converging on his position. Any normal person would have been eliminated instantly. Instead, Daeho closed his eyes and took a deep breath. The beams fired, but they seemed to bend around him like light passing through water. He opened his eyes and continued forward, completely unharmed. Hyunwoo grabbed Minho's arm. "How is he doing that?" Minho could only shake his head. He had known Daeho his entire life, but he had never seen anything like this. His friend moved through the impossible course as if it were a peaceful garden, stepping between dangers that should have destroyed him. The final chamber contained the most difficult obstacle of all. The exit was protected by a spinning barrier of energy that moved too fast for the eye to follow. Every few seconds there was a gap barely wide enough for a person to pass through, but the timing was impossible to predict. Previous groups had tried to use their scanners and computers to calculate when the gap would appear. All had failed, because their equipment stopped working in the electromagnetic field around the barrier. Daeho approached the spinning wall of energy and stood perfectly still. He watched it spin for several seconds, his head tilted slightly as if he were listening to something only he could hear. Then he stepped forward. He passed through the barrier without touching it, moving at exactly the right moment to slip through. The gap. But those watching from the observation deck saw something that made no sense. The gap had not been there when he stepped forward. It had appeared around him, as if the barrier itself had recognized him and allowed him to pass. 30 minutes, Zeflon announced as Daeho reached the exit. Course completed in 8 minutes and 15 seconds. No equipment used, no damage taken. The observation deck was completely silent. Hundreds of alien recruits stared at the monk in orange robes who had just accomplished the impossible with nothing but a wooden stick. Commander Veltar was the first to speak. His scaled face showed no emotion, but his yellow eyes were thoughtful. "Interesting technique. How did you move through zero gravity without propulsion?" "I did not fight the gravity," Daeho replied. "I found harmony with it." "And the laser turrets?" "I listened to their rhythm. All things have rhythm. When you understand the rhythm, you can dance with it instead of fighting against it." Captain Nixara clicked her mandibles together. "Dancing will not help you in real combat, monk. The second trial will test your ability to fight, not dance." Daeho bowed slightly. "I understand." But as the recruits dispersed for the rest period before the next trial, So-Jin approached him with her scanner still in her hands. "The energy readings," she said quietly. "I have studied human physiology for years. What I am detecting should not be possible. Where does it come from?" Daeho looked at her scanner, then at her worried face. "From the same place all energy comes from," he said. "The source of all things." "That is not an answer. It is the only answer that matters." As they walked back toward their quarters, Minho fell into step beside his old friend. "Daeho, what is happening to you? You are different from when we were children." "I am the same," Daeho replied. "Perhaps you are seeing more clearly." Behind them, Instructor Zeflon watched them go. Its energy form flickered and shifted, and for just a moment it looked almost excited. It had seen something in the monk's performance that the others had missed, something that reminded it of very old stories from very old worlds. Stories about the guardians who had once protected the galaxy from darkness. The second trial would begin soon, and everyone expected it to reveal the monk's limits. They were about to discover that some limits exist only in the mind, and the grand arena was older than most civilizations. It had been carved from a single asteroid, its walls polished smooth by countless generations of builders. The ceiling stretched up into darkness, and the floor was covered with sand that had absorbed the blood of warriors from 1,000 different worlds. Seats rose in circles around the fighting floor, filled with aliens who had come to watch the final trial. Some were military officers evaluating potential recruits. Others were simply curious to see how the latest group of warriors would perform. All of them had heard stories about the human monk who had completed the obstacle course without any technology. Arena Master Kolvek stood on a platform overlooking the sand. He was ancient even by the standards of his people, with gray skin that looked like weathered stone and eyes that glowed with inner fire. Scars covered his arms and chest, each one a reminder of battles fought long ago. The final trial, his voice boomed across the arena, will test your ability to survive against the deadliest predators in known space. The Razor Stalkers of Keleth Prime have never been defeated by a single warrior. They move faster than thought and strike with blades, sharper than molecular cutters. On the arena floor, a gate began to rise. Behind it, shadows moved in the darkness. Yellow eyes gleamed, and the sound of metal scraping against stone echoed through the space. You have 30 minutes to survive, Kolvex continued. Work together, or alone. Use any weapons you possess. Fight or hide as you choose. But know this. The Razor Stalkers have killed experienced warriors who carried the finest weapons in the galaxy. They will show you no mercy. Most of the remaining recruits had formed groups for safety. The blue-skinned alien with 4 arms led a team of technology specialists. They carried energy weapons and portable shields, planning to create a defensive position and fight from cover. Another group consisted of heavily armored warriors from the warrior worlds. Their skin was thick as leather, and their muscles were enhanced by genetic modification. They intended to meet the Razor Stalkers head-on with blade and claw. The human soldiers had formed their own team. Minho stood with Sojin, Hyunwoo, and 3 others from Earth's Defense Force. They had studied recordings of Razor Stalker attacks and developed tactics based on human military doctrine. But Dae Ho stood alone in the center of the arena. He had declined all invitations to join the groups, politely explaining that he preferred to face the trial by himself. He wore the same simple orange robes and carried only his wooden staff. In the viewing stands, bets were being placed. The odds against the monk's survival were enormous. Most spectators expected him to be eliminated within the first few minutes. Bai Jinna, the Korean medic assigned to treat wounded recruits, watched from the medical station with growing concern. She had seen the monk's performance in the obstacle course, but this was different. The Razor Stalkers were not machines that could be predicted. They were living hunters with intelligence and malice. Medical teams to ready positions, she announced to her assistants. We are going to be very busy. The gate finished opening and silence fell over the arena. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the first Razor Stalker emerged from the shadows. It was beautiful and terrible at the same time. Its body was sleek and silver, like liquid metal given form. 6 legs carried it across the sand with fluid grace, each step completely silent despite its size. Its arms ended in blades that gleamed with their own light, edges so sharp they seemed to cut the air itself. More stalkers followed. They spread out across the arena floor, surrounding the recruits with predatory patience. Their yellow eyes fixed on their prey, calculating distances and planning attacks. The blue-skinned team leader raised his weapons. Hold positions, he called to his group. Wait for them to attack first. But Razor Stalkers did not wait. They moved like lightning-made flesh, crossing impossible distances in the blink of an eye. The first attack came from 3 directions at once. Energy beams filled the air as the technology team fired their weapons. Some shots found their targets, but the stalkers' silver skin seemed to absorb the energy without damage. Their blades swept out, cutting through shields and armor like paper. The warrior teams fared better initially. Their enhanced strength and thick skin let them trade blows with the predators. But the stalkers were faster and more skilled. For every wound they received, they dealt 3 in return. The human team used earth tactics, moving as a unit and covering each other's backs. They managed to drive off the first attack, but everyone could see they were outmatched. Their weapons were effective, but not effective enough. In the center of the arena, Daeho had not moved. Razor stalkers circled him like sharks around a swimmer, but none had attacked yet. They seemed puzzled by his stillness, unsure whether he was a threat or simply frozen with fear. "Why are they not attacking him?" Sojin called out between bursts of gunfire. Minho glanced over at his old friend. Daeho stood with his eyes closed, his wooden staff held loosely in both hands. He looked like he was meditating in a peaceful temple instead of facing deadly predators in an arena. "I do not know," Minho replied, "but I wish I was standing next to him." The battle raged around the monk as if he existed in a different world. Warriors fell to stalker blades, their cries echoing off the arena walls. Medical teams rushed to drag the wounded to safety. The sand began to turn red with blood. Finally, the largest razor stalker decided to test the motionless human. It approached slowly, blades extended, yellow eyes locked on Daeho's face. The arena fell silent as spectators held their breath. The stalker struck with blinding speed, its blade aimed at the monk's heart. In that instant, Daeho moved. What happened next defied explanation. The monk seemed to step sideways through space, itself appearing beside the stalker instead of in front of it. His wooden staff moved in a perfect circle, not striking the creature but somehow redirecting its momentum. The stalker's own attack carried it past its target, leaving it confused and off balance. Daeho returned to his original position as if nothing had happened. The stalker spun around, snarling with frustration, and attacked again. This time, Daeho did not step aside. Instead, he seemed to rise into the air, floating above the creature's blades like a leaf on the wind. His feet never touched the ground, yet he moved with perfect control, drifting just out of reach of every strike. The crowd gasped. Even the other razor stalkers stopped their attacks to watch something they had never seen before. A human was flying without wings, without technology, without any visible means of support. "Impossible," Arena Master Kolvex whispered, but his ancient eyes were bright with recognition. He had heard stories of such things in the old days, but he had thought they were merely legends. More stalkers joined the attack on the floating monk. They leaped through the air, trying to reach him, but he moved between their blades like water flowing around stones. Sometimes he seemed solid, deflecting their weapons with his staff. Other times he appeared to become translucent, letting their strikes pass harmlessly through him. A golden light began to emanate from his body. It started as a faint glow around his hands and gradually spread until his entire form was outlined in warm radiance. The light did not blind or burn, but it seemed to calm the savage creatures attacking him. One by one, the razor stalkers began to slow their attacks. Their yellow eyes lost their predatory gleam, replaced by something that looked almost like wonder. They had been bred for killing, their minds filled with nothing but the urge to hunt and destroy. But the light from the floating monk touched something deeper in their nature. The largest stalker was the last to stop fighting. It stood directly below Daeho, its blades still raised, confusion clear in its alien features. The monk descended slowly until his feet touched the sand. He reached out with one hand and gently touched the creature's silver skin. The transformation was immediate. The stalker's blades retracted, and it stepped back with something that looked like respect. Its yellow eyes met Daeho's brown ones, and some kind of understanding passed between them. "Time," Arena Master Kolvex announced, though his voice was filled with awe rather than authority. The arena was silent except for the moans of wounded recruits. Half the candidates had been eliminated, many requiring immediate medical attention. But the monk in orange robe stood unharmed in the center of the floor, surrounded by razor stalkers that had somehow been transformed from predators into guardians. Jinnah rushed onto the sand with her medical team. As she worked to treat the wounded, she kept glancing at Daeho with amazement. "How?" she asked when she passed near him. "How did you do that?" "I did not fight them," Daeho replied simply. "I reminded them who they used to be." "What do you mean?" But before he could answer, an alarm began blaring throughout the station. Red lights flashed and Commander Veltar's voice echoed from speakers throughout the arena. "All personnel to battle stations. The Keth Mori fleet has been detected approaching our position. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. The trials were over. The real war was about to begin. All personnel to battle stations. The Keth Mori fleet has been detected approaching our position. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill." The trials were over. The real war was about to begin. As recruits and spectators rushed toward the exits, Arena Master Kolvex made his way down to the arena floor. He approached Daeho with slow, careful steps, his ancient eyes filled with questions that had haunted him for centuries. "Who are you, monk?" he asked quietly. Daeho looked up at him with eyes that seemed far older than his young face. "I am what my teachers made me," he replied. "Nothing more, nothing less." "And what did they make you?" For the first time since arriving at the station, Daeho smiled. It was a sad smile, filled with the weight of knowledge that few others carried. "A bridge," he said, "between what was and what must be." The razor stalkers gathered around him as he walked toward the exit, their yellow eyes now peaceful and alert. They had found something they had lost long ago, something the galaxy had forgotten in its rush toward technology and war. They had found their purpose again. In the viewing stands, Instructor Zephlon watched the monk leave with growing understanding. Its energy form flickered with excitement as pieces of an ancient puzzle began to fall into place. The Guardian had awakened. The question now was whether it was too late. The planet Kepler 442b had been a peaceful farming world until 3 days ago. Now its sky burned with the fires of war. Keth Mori battleships hung above the surface like dark thunderclouds, raining destruction on the settlements below. The few Galactic Alliance ships that had arrived in time fought desperately, but they were outnumbered 10-1. Admiral Song Myung-ho stood on the bridge of the Alliance flagship, watching his fleet fall apart around him. The Korean commander had fought in 17 battles during his career, but he had never faced anything like the Keth Mori war machine. Their ships were black as space itself, covered in spikes and armor that seemed to absorb energy weapons. Worse, they fought with a cruelty that turned his stomach. "Sir, we have lost the Defender and the Star Lance," reported his tactical officer. "The Harmony is venting atmosphere from multiple hull breaches. They are requesting permission to retreat." "Denied," Admiral Song replied grimly. "If we retreat, the civilians on the surface have no hope. Send all available fighters to cover the evacuation sites." On the planet's surface, the situation was even worse. Keth Mori ground forces had landed in massive drop pods, disgorging warriors that looked like they had been designed by nightmares. They stood 8 feet tall, with armor that seemed to be grown rather than built. Their weapons fired projectiles that could punch through concrete walls, and their claws could tear through steel plating. Lieutenant Han Ji-woo crouched behind the ruins of what had once been a school. The young Korean officer's uniform was torn and stained with blood, both her own and that of her fallen comrades. Her energy rifle was down to its last power cell, and her communications with headquarters had been cut off hours ago. "Ma'am," called Sergeant Park from across the rubble-strewn street. "We have civilians trapped in the community center, about 30 families with children." Ji-woo closed her eyes and tried to think. Her orders were to hold this position until reinforcements arrived, but reinforcements were not coming. The Keth Mori had broken through alliance lines all across the continent. Soon this would be another dead world in their expanding empire. "How many warriors between us and the center?" she asked. "At least a dozen, maybe more. They have heavy weapons and some kind of energy shield generators." Ji-woo checked her rifle's power indicator one more time. Half a charge left, enough for maybe 20 shots if she was careful. Against a dozen Keth Mori warriors, it might as well be empty. "Ma'am." Park said quietly. There is something else. We are getting reports of a small group moving through the city. They say it is some of the recruits from the station led by that human monk. The monk? Jiwoo remembered the stories that had spread through the Alliance fleet. A human in orange robes who had completed the trials without any technology, who had somehow tamed the razor stalkers with his bare hands. Most soldiers had dismissed the tales as exaggeration, but Park's expression suggested otherwise. They say he is heading for the Kethmori command ship, Park continued. The one that landed in Central Plaza. Jiwoo almost laughed. The command ship was a fortress of alien metal and energy, defended by hundreds of the enemy's best warriors. It would take an entire battalion with heavy weapons to even approach it, and they would likely all die in the attempt. Sir, her radio crackled to life. This is Scout Team 7. We have visual on the monks group. You need to see this. Patch it through to my display, Jiwoo ordered. The screen on her wrist lit up, showing a street camera view of Central Plaza. The Kethmori command ship sat in the middle of the square like a black mountain, its hull bristling with weapons and defensive systems. Around it, enemy warriors patrolled in perfect formation. Then she saw them. A small group of humans moving through the plaza as if they were taking a peaceful walk. She recognized Minho and some of the other Korean recruits from the defense station. So Jin was there carrying what looked like a scanner of some kind. Hyunwoo walked beside them, his pilot's training evident in the way he watched the sky for threats. But it was the figure in orange robes that made Jiwoo's breath catch in her throat. Daeho moved at the center of the group, completely calm, despite the chaos around him. His wooden staff was in his hands, and that same golden light she had heard about seemed to surround him like a gentle flame. How are they not being attacked? Park asked in amazement. As if in answer to his question, a squad of Kethmori warriors spotted the humans and raised their weapons. Jiwoo expected to see the small group cut down in seconds. Instead, something impossible happened. The energy, beams from the alien weapons struck an invisible barrier around the monk and his companions. The deadly projectiles simply vanished, as if they had never existed. The Kethmori warriors fired again and again, but their weapons had no effect. Daeho raised his staff, and the golden light around him grew brighter. The attacking warriors suddenly stopped firing. They lowered their weapons and stepped aside, allowing the humans to pass as if they were honored guests instead of enemies. Sir, Park whispered. What is he? Before Jiwoo could answer, her radio came alive with frantic reports from across the battlefield. Kethmori forces were retreating from positions they had held for hours. Some were abandoning their weapons and walking away from the fight. Others were simply standing still as if they had forgotten why they were there. On the Admiral's flagship, Song Myung-ho was receiving the same impossible reports. All stations, confirm your status, he ordered. Are the Kethmori really withdrawing? Confirmed, sir, came the reply from a dozen different sources. Enemy forces are pulling back from all positions. Their attack has completely stopped. Song stared at the tactical display in disbelief. The Kethmori had been winning. They had been on the verge of total victory. Why would they suddenly retreat? His answer came from an unexpected source. The main screen lit up with an incoming transmission, but it was not from any Alliance ship. The signal was coming from the Kethmori command vessel on the planet's surface. The face that appeared on the screen was unlike anything Song had ever seen. It was clearly Kethmori, with the characteristic bone ridges and dark skin. But something was different. The eyes that should have been filled with rage and hatred instead showed confusion and what looked almost like fear. Alliance Commander, the alien said, in heavily accented but understandable Korean. I am General Thexmore of the 3rd Conquest Fleet. I must speak with the one called Daeho. Song's tactical officer leaned close to him. Sir, how does he know that name, and how does he know Korean? I do not know, Song replied quietly. Then, to the screen, he said, General, you are in the middle of an invasion. Why do you wish to speak with one of our recruits? The Kethmori general's face twisted with what might have been pain. Because he is not just a recruit. He is something we have not seen for 10,000 years, something we thought was destroyed forever. On the planet's surface, Daeho and his companions had reached the command ship. The massive vessel loomed above them, its black hull covered with weapons that could level a city, but none of them were firing. "Brother Daeho," Minho said quietly, "are you certain about this? We do not know what is waiting inside that ship." "Yes, we do," Daeho replied. "The same thing that is waiting inside all of us. The choice between who we are and who we could become." So Jin checked her scanner one more time. The readings she was getting made no sense according to everything she knew about physics and biology. The energy emanating from Daeho was not just powerful, it was fundamentally different from anything she had studied. It felt ancient and new, at the same time like something that had always existed but had been forgotten. "The readings are getting stronger," she reported. "Whatever is happening to you, it is accelerating." Daeho nodded. "It is time." A hatch opened in the side of the command ship, and a ramp extended to the ground. No weapons fired, no alarm sounded. The ship's defenders had simply stepped aside, as if recognizing something they had lost long ago. The humans walked up the ramp and into the belly of the alien vessel. The corridors were dark and cold, lined with metal that seemed to absorb light. Strange symbols covered the walls, writing in a language none of them recognized. But Daeho moved through the ship as if he had been there before. He led them without hesitation through passages that twisted and turned like the inside of a living creature. Behind them, Kethmori warriors watched silently, their weapons lowered. They finally reached the command center, a vast chamber filled with screens and control panels. In the center of the room, General Thexmore waited. He was massive even by Kethmori standards, with scars covering his dark skin and eyes that burned with inner fire. "So," the general said, his voice like grinding stone. "The legends were true, after all." "Some legends," Daeho replied quietly. "Others are yet to be written." The general studied him for a long moment. "Do you know what you are, human? Do you understand what flows through your veins?" "I understand enough." "Then you know why I must challenge you, why I must test whether you are truly what you appear to be." Thexmore reached behind his back and drew a weapon that made the humans gasp. It was a sword, but not like any blade they had ever seen. It seemed to be made of pure darkness, its edge so sharp it appeared to cut through the air itself. Energy crackled along its length, and the metal sang with barely contained power. "This blade has killed star destroyers," the general said. "It can cut through the hull of a battleship. It was forged in the heart of a dying sun and tempered in the void between galaxies." Daeho looked at the terrible weapon, then at his simple, wooden staff. "It is beautiful," he said sincerely. "Do you surrender?" Thexmore asked. "I never surrender," Daeho replied. "But I do not fight either." "Then what do you do?" For the first time since entering the ship, Daeho smiled. "I remember." The golden light that had surrounded him throughout their journey suddenly blazed, like a miniature sun. But this time, it was different. This time Minho could see images in the light, glimpses of things that had happened long ago and far away. He saw vast cities that touched the clouds, built by beings of incredible wisdom and power. He saw ships that sailed between the stars like leaves on the wind, carrying knowledge and peace to every corner of the galaxy. He saw guardians who protected all life from the darkness that lurked in the spaces between worlds. And he saw what had happened when the darkness finally won. General Thexmore raised his impossible sword and the final battle began. General Thexmore raised his dark blade and the command center filled with an energy that made the air itself tremble. The sword was more than a weapon. It was a piece of concentrated hatred, forged from the pain and rage of countless conquered worlds. But as the general prepared to strike, something in his eyes changed. The burning anger that had driven him for centuries flickered and dimmed. For just a moment he looked confused, as if waking from a long and terrible dream. "Wait," he said, his voice uncertain. "I remember you." Daeho stood perfectly still, his wooden staff held loosely in both hands. The golden light around him pulsed gently, like the breathing of some vast, sleeping creature. "Yes," he said softly. "You do. But that is impossible. You are human. Your species has existed for only a few thousand years. The Guardians fell 10 millennia ago." "Time is a circle," Deho replied. "What falls rises again. What is lost is found again. What dies is reborn again." The images in the golden light grew stronger and clearer. Minho watched in amazement as the history of the galaxy unfolded before his eyes. He saw the ancient civilization that had once brought peace to countless worlds. They were not human, but they were not entirely alien either. They looked like what humans might become if they learned to touch the energy that flowed through all living things. These ancient guardians had built their civilization not on technology alone, but on understanding. They knew that all life was connected by invisible threads of energy. They could heal with a touch, move objects with their minds, and bring peace to the most savage hearts. "The Luminari," General Thexmore whispered, his terrible sword beginning to tremble in his hands. "You are one of them, but how?" "The Luminari did not die," Deho explained, taking a step closer to the towering general. "They knew the darkness was coming. They knew their time was ending. So they scattered their knowledge across the galaxy, planting seeds in young worlds that would not bloom for thousands of years." The golden light pulsed again, and more images appeared. This time Minho saw Earth as it had been long ago. Primitive humans lived in caves and hunted with stone weapons. But some of them were different. Some of them sat in quiet meditation, discovering the same energy that the luminary had mastered. "The temples." Sojin breathed, understanding beginning to dawn in her eyes. "The Shaolin temples, the Buddhist monasteries, all of the ancient spiritual traditions. They were not just about religion, they were schools for guardians. For thousands of years humans learned without knowing what they were learning," Deho continued. "They thought they were seeking enlightenment or inner peace. They did not realize they were preparing for this day." General Thexmore's sword wavered, its dark energy beginning to fade. "The Kethmori were Luminari once," he said, his voice filled with anguish. "Before the corruption took us. Before we forgot who we were and became monsters." "I know," Deho said gently. "That is why I did not come here to fight you. I came to remind you." The general's sword clattered to the floor, without its dark power. It looked like nothing more than a piece of twisted metal. Thexmore fell to his knees, his massive frame shaking with emotions he had not felt in centuries. "The things we have done," he whispered. "The worlds we have destroyed. The lives we have taken. How can we ever be forgiven?" "Forgiveness begins with choice," Deho replied. "You can choose to remain what the darkness made you, or you can choose to remember what you were before." The monk knelt beside the alien general and placed his hand on the scarred warrior's shoulder. The golden light flowed between them, and Thexmore's eyes widened with wonder and pain. Minho watched his childhood friend perform what could only be called a miracle. The corruption that had twisted the Kethmori general for millennia began to burn away like fog before the morning sun. Beneath the scars and hatred, something pure and bright began to emerge. "I remember," Thexmore said, tears streaming down his alien face. "I remember the songs of my people. I remember the gardens of our homeworld. I remember who we were before the great darkness came." Throughout the command ship, the same transformation was taking place. Kethmori warriors put down their weapons and looked around in confusion, as if seeing their surroundings clearly for the first time in ages. The dark energy that had driven them to conquest and destruction was fading, replaced by memories of a time when they had been builders and healers instead of destroyers. Hyunwoo activated his communicator. "Admiral Song, this is Pilot Park. You need to hear this. The Kethmori fleet is standing down. All ships have ceased hostilities and are requesting permission to communicate." On the Alliance flagship, Admiral Song Myung-ho stared at his displays, in disbelief. The massive Kethmori fleet that had been destroying his forces minutes earlier was now sending peaceful communication requests. Their weapons had powered down. and their attack formations were breaking apart. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we are receiving messages from Kethmori ships throughout the system. They are asking for instructions on how to begin peace negotiations." Song activated his own communicator. "Pilot Park, what is happening down there? How did one monk stop an entire invasion?" Minho answered instead. "Admiral, he did not stop the invasion. He reminded them who they used to be before they became invaders." In the command center, General Thexmore was standing again, but he looked like a completely different being. The rage and hatred that had defined him for so long were gone, replaced by a deep sadness and a desperate hope. "Guardian," he said to Deho, using the ancient title with reverence. "My people have committed terrible crimes across the galaxy. We have destroyed worlds and enslaved entire species. What can we do to make amends?" "Begin by stopping," Deho replied simply. "Then begin by building instead of destroying, heal instead of harming, protect instead of conquering. It will take centuries to undo the damage we have caused. Then you had better start now." General Thexmore bowed deeply, a gesture of respect that had not been seen from a Kethmori warrior in 10,000 years. "It will be done, Guardian. I give you my word." As they prepared to leave the command ship, Sojin approached Daiho with her scanner still in hand. "I need to understand," she said. "The energy I'm detecting from you is unlike anything in our science textbooks. How is this possible?" "Your science studies the universe from the outside," Daiho explained. "It measures and categorizes and tries to control. But there is another way to understand the cosmos. From the inside. By becoming part of it instead of standing apart from it. And that is what you have done? That is what all humans can do, given time and proper teaching. Earth was chosen as a guardian world not because we are special, but because we are ready. Our species has reached the point where we can learn to touch the energy that connects all things." Minho shook his head in amazement. "All this time I thought you were just my strange friend who liked to sit quietly and watch clouds. I never imagined you were anything like this." Deho smiled at him with genuine warmth. "I am still your strange friend who likes to watch clouds. That has not changed. But now I also remember why watching clouds is important. Everything is connected, Minho. The clouds, the wind, the earth, the stars, all the living beings scattered across the galaxy. When you understand that connection, you understand everything." 3 months later, the Galactic Alliance was a very different organization. The war with the Kethmori had ended not in victory or defeat, but in reconciliation. Former enemies worked side by side to repair the damage caused by centuries of conflict. Deho had returned to his simple life, but now he traveled between worlds instead of staying in one temple. Wherever he went, he taught the ancient ways to those who sought to learn. Aliens who had never heard of meditation sat in quiet contemplation beside human monks. Former warriors learned to heal instead of harm. Commander Veltar had been among his first students. The reptilian officer had approached Deho with skepticism, but had stayed to learn with growing wonder. "I spent 50 years believing that strength came from weapons and armor," he told other students. "Now I discover that true strength comes from understanding." Captain Nixara had also joined the growing movement. The insectoid warrior still carried her weapons, but she used them now to protect rather than to conquer. "I am learning to fight for peace instead of for victory," she explained to those who questioned her transformation. Even Arena Master Kolvex had left his ancient Colosseum to study with the Guardian. "I have seen 10,000 warriors pass through my arena," the old warrior said, "but I never saw one who could turn enemies into friends with nothing but compassion." Minho, Sojin, and Hyunwoo had become bridges between the new Guardians and the Alliance military. They translated ancient wisdom into modern applications, showing how the old ways could work alongside new technology instead of replacing it. "We are not abandoning science," Sojin explained to skeptical engineers. "We are adding to it. There are forms of energy and connection that our instruments cannot measure, but our hearts can feel." On the former Kethmori homeworld, General Thexmore worked tirelessly to help his people remember their true nature. Gardens grew where weapon factories had once stood. Schools replaced military training centers. Children learned songs instead of war cries. The Guardian showed us that redemption is possible, Thexmore told the first Interspecies Peace Conference. No matter how far we fall into darkness, we can always choose to walk back toward the light. The Alliance itself was restructuring around the new understanding. Military commanders were required to study meditation alongside tactics. Diplomats learned to sense the emotions of alien species they had never encountered before. Scientists began researching the energy fields that connected all living things. But perhaps the most important change was the simplest one. Throughout the galaxy, beings who had once seen only differences between species began to recognize their fundamental connection. The same energy that flowed through human guardians also flowed through Kethmori warriors, through reptilian commanders, through insectoid fighters, through energy beings, and through every other form of life. Deho stood on the observation deck of a transport ship, watching stars drift by through the viewport. He wore the same simple orange robes he had always worn, and he carried the same wooden staff. To most observers, he looked like nothing more than a peaceful monk traveling between worlds. But those who had learned to see with inner vision could perceive the golden light that surrounded him, the energy that connected him to every living thing in the galaxy. They could see that he was exactly what he had always claimed to be, a bridge between what was and what could be. Beside him, a young Kethmori student sat in meditation, learning to find the same inner peace that had once seemed impossible for his warrior species. On his other side, a human child practiced moving small objects with her mind, discovering abilities that her parents had never dreamed existed. "Master," the Kethmori student asked, "will there ever be a time when all beings in the galaxy understand these teachings?" Deho smiled and watched a distant star fade into the cosmic background. "Understanding comes to those who seek it," he replied. "And seeking begins with a single step." "What was your first step, Master?" "The same as yours," Deho said gently. "I sat quietly and listened to the universe until I could hear it breathing." The transport ship continued its journey through the stars, carrying its passengers toward worlds where the ancient wisdom was taking root in new soil. Behind them, the galaxy was slowly healing from millennia of war and division. Ahead of them, countless worlds waited to learn that the energy connecting all things was not just a theory or a philosophy. It was the foundation of reality itself, waiting patiently for any being brave enough to open their heart and remember what they had always known. They had laughed at his robes, never knowing they mocked the uniform of the galaxy's oldest guardians. But the laughter had stopped long ago, replaced by something far more valuable: understanding, peace, and the knowledge that even in the darkest times, the light never truly dies. It only waits for someone willing to kindle it again.